Welcome to the MAHA Media Hub. I'm Tony Lyons, president of MAHA Action. Today we're talking about some big wins for the MAHA movement, thanks to Secretary Kennedy pushing for the kind of common sense reforms that Americans have been asking for. And, thanks to all of you for your help in getting these things done. Last week, at Secretary Kennedy's urging, the FDA reversed a short-sighted Biden-era policy that had cut off access to essential peptides. MAHA has been loud about these problems from the start. They had less to do with science and more to do with big pharma protecting its turf. By overturning the 2023 Category 2 listing, the FDA has finally ended the de facto ban on compounding pharmacies making substances like BPC-157 and TB-500. That's a huge win for health freedom and proof of what happens when we put people and small businesses ahead of big government and big pharma. For a lot of Americans, compounding pharmacies are where you actually get effective treatments at a fair price from pharmacists who know you and know what they're doing. And let's be honest, the previous administration's war on peptides was really part of a bigger war on compounding pharmacies and on medical freedom and informed consent. So at the same time that they immediately pulled off 12 popular peptides from the Category 2 ban list, the FDA is now fast-tracking a meeting of the Pharmacy Compounding Advisory Committee. That's a critical step towards getting a much bigger list of peptides back on the market where they can actually help people who need them. I know we've got a lot of peptide folks on this call, but anyone just tuning in, let me say a word about what peptides actually are. Peptides are short chains of amino acids. They work like messengers, telling your body to repair tissue, calm down inflammation, balance hormones, and get your metabolism working right again. After decades of processed food, environmental toxins, and drugs that just mask symptoms, that's what a lot of people in this country need. Unlike the patented drugs that keep you hooked for life, peptides work with your own body. They help you recover from injuries, give you more energy, hold on to muscle, and fight the chronic inflammation behind so much of our obesity and autoimmune disease. They give regular people a way to take charge of their health without waiting on a broken system for permission. The other thing that's exciting about peptides is who gets access to them. Tools that used to be reserved for elite athletes and wealthy people are now available to absolutely anybody. BPC-157 for gut and tendon repair, CJC and ipamorelin for growth hormone. These don't replace good food, sleep, or exercise, but they work alongside them. By expanding access through responsible compounding, we're giving millions of people a safer, more affordable way to feel like themselves once again. The second big win came during a Saturday meeting in the Oval Office. The president, Secretary Kennedy, and Marty McCary and Joe Rogan sat down with veterans to mark the signing of an executive order that's going to change how we treat mental illness in this country. With one signature, we went from ignoring psychedelics to embracing what they can do. ARPA-H has committed $50 million to matching state-level investments in psychedelic research. And people with severe mental illness now have the right to try psychedelic therapies that were off the table for far too long. Millions of Americans, including a lot of veterans, finally have options they've been waiting years for. When MAHA speaks up, whether that's people on this call or someone with a microphone the size of Joe Rogan's, Secretary Kennedy and President Trump listen. That's why peptides and psychedelics, treatments the establishment used to laugh at, are now front and center in the fight against chronic disease and our mental health crisis. A third win came from all your hard work. The House Rules Committee wanted to advance a bill, H.R. 2289, which would essentially allow telecom companies to place a cell tower outside your window with no local input. I sent a letter to Speaker Johnson urging him to oppose this horrible bill. MAHA Action, along with our friends at Children's Health Defense, mobilized our backers all around the country to make calls and send messages to the committee, and then they backed down. Your work made them back down. Your voices were heard, and your voices made the difference. Today, we also want to talk about another MAHA win that we hope to effectuate, and this time at the Supreme Court. The People versus Poison rally is happening on Monday, April 27th at 9 a.m., right outside the U.S. Supreme Court. And a lot of us will be there to send a message to the justices and to the whole country. Thousands of farmers, parents, activists are going to demand an end to the unchecked use of toxic chemicals in our food as the court hears the Monsanto versus Durnell case. Bare Monsanto lobbyists are spinning hard, but the case is simple. Can a state court jury hold Monsanto liable for putting a cancer warning on Roundup, even though the EPA didn't require one? If Monsanto wins, toxic chemicals get a nationwide liability shield for failure to warn. If Monsanto loses, victims keep the right to seek justice. That's it. Can we, the people, hold companies accountable for poisoning our food, or do they get a free pass? We just won on peptides, and I believe we can win this one too, on glyphosate, and on everything like it. So let's get into it. Today we're joined by U.S. Senator for Kentucky, Rand Paul, Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods at FDA, Kyle Diamantis, food activist and author known as the Food Babe, Bonnie Hari, public health advocate and founder of Glyphosate Girl, Kelly Ryerson, healthcare attorney and pharmacy regulations expert, Lee Rosebush, functional medicine practitioner and author, Dr. Daniel Pompa, neuroscientist and co-author of Cancer is a Parasite, William Supple Jr., the knowledge doc, Dr. Eric Berg, and human biologist and biohacker, Gary Brecka. First up, we'll hear from the founder of Ways to Well, owner of Revive RX Pharmacy, investor in psychedelic research, and health optimization advocate, Brigham Bueller. He's a healthcare entrepreneur transforming America's broken system. He fights for a healthcare model that prioritizes patients over profits through preventative care, transparency, and innovation. Welcome, Brigham. Great to see you again.
Tony, thank you for the introduction and the enthusiasm. This was a monumental week. I can tell you this is something that I have been fighting for the last few years, and I just cannot thank Secretary Kennedy and everyone on this group on the call who have fought for this so diligently. This was not an easy fight. We were up against a monumental battle with Big Pharma and their lobbying power. And for this to get to the finish line like it did is unbelievable. As somebody who owns a telemedicine company and a pharmacy that employs over 600 hardworking Americans right here on American soil, one of the things that I've tried to articulate to the FDA, there's so many traps that have been set by Big Pharma. I definitely want to talk about the psychedelics and the win there. But with the peptide win, the testosterone win, the announcement from Admiral Christine and Marty on the changes with testosterone, all of these things are going to make medications more accessible, more affordable, and help drive preventative predictive medicine. One of the things that I've talked about in depth is this system is not working. It isn't a knock on the FDA or its ability to regulate. It is the system that the FDA inherited. And that system is a whack-a-mole system that allows major pharmaceutical conglomerates to capitalize on the revolving door that has historically been the FDA. And I think that's what we saw with the original peptide announcement under the Biden administration. It was very unfortunate, but a lot of those peptides were banned, and it didn't take away accessibility. What it took away was safe accessibility. It forced the average American to go to gray and black market solutions. In fact, 4 out of 5 peptides being filled in America right now are being filled via gray and black market internet sources, meaning there is no checks and balances. There is no clinician in the chain of custody. There's nobody providing medical oversight. Even the large language models like ChatGPT have taken away patients' ability to ask questions on how to reconstitute or mix a medication. I mean, we were literally living in the Wild West So for the naysayers who have said this is, the Wild West now, we've been living in the Wild West. This is where patients didn't have a clinician anywhere in the chain of command. Now clinicians and patients have sovereignty and autonomy over their health again to allow a clinician to make the decision alongside a patient on what treatment modality may be best for them. And Tony, you did such an eloquent job of breaking down peptides. I don't want to get too in the weeds on the science or anything behind that. But to me, the major overarching theme of this debate is, do we believe in medical freedom and medical right to choose? Are these compounds safe? And we know, and I'm sure Gary and several of the other folks who have practiced medicine or own into these sectors could tell you, for almost a decade, we were safely using many of the compounds that got banned under Biden's administration. And to see those compounds come back is just unbelievable for patients and for accessibility for the average American. It also, what a lot of people don't understand is most of the items on a hospital crash cart, most of the items used in hospital systems are made by compounding pharmacies. And those products have zero profit margin to minimal profit margin. And when you're attempting to run a compounding pharmacy and employ all these hardworking Americans, it's very difficult to run and scale those pharmacies without products like peptides. And so for these products to be put back, rightfully so, into the hands of the consumer and to the patients where they can decide, if what we were doing was working historically, the system is not built or equipped to practice predictive proactive medicine. In the insurance model, it is literally monetizing chronic disease. I mean, that is just the facts. All of the pharmacy benefit managers that decide what medications get covered have been captured by the big five insurance companies. United, Cigna, Aetna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, they all own the PBMs, and the PBMs decide what drugs get put on formulary. And so this is a much more complicated, nuanced topic than I think the average person understands. And if the FDA would have gone the other way, patients would have been forced to turn to places like China and India to get these life-changing treatments and these treatment modalities. A real-world example I can give you on the psychedelic topic, to touch on what Tony said, the announcement around Ibogaine from the White House this past Saturday was monumental. The studies, the data, this is not bro science. These are Stanford professors, Stanford educated individuals that have run most of these studies, and the data is unbelievably compelling. I had misfortune at a young age of coming right out of college and being employed by a well-known pharmaceutical company called Eli Lilly, where I was told we were going to solve depression. Depression was a thing of the past. Prozac was going to solve depression. 25 years later, have we solved depression? Deaths of despair at an all-time high. Anxiety at an all-time high. Prescription drug sales of SSRIs at an all-time high. But what does the retrospective data show us? 25 years later, the retrospective data across all SSRIs, this isn't me saying this is the data saying this, does not differentiate from placebo. So what have we spent billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars on trying to help Americans with this chronic debilitating depression and anxiety and PTSD with no real benefit? Meanwhile, Pharma rode it all the way to the bank. And treatments like Ibogaine and psychedelics are a tool in the tool belt that will hopefully allow clinicians to provide their patients and these military veterans with alternatives, efficacious, safe alternatives when administered appropriately and under the proper clinical supervision. And I just think between peptides and the psychedelic movement that this new administration has helped create, the future is unbelievably bright. And we can go to practicing, get away from the sick care model, where through telemedicine platforms and the opportunity to utilize modalities like hormone optimization for men and women, we can truly drive health span. We know that our 40s is the decade of decline. Men on average age 12 years biologically between 40 and 50, and women age 17 years biologically between 40 and 50. It is a massive decline in our physiological state during that decade. And we now have tools and options in the tool belt that allow clinicians to get proactive, predictive, and preventative. And I'm just unbelievably thankful and appreciative for everything that Secretary Kennedy and this administration has done to pave the way for accessibility for all Americans. And that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time.
Thanks so much. And, it's so true that big pharma games and tricks and deep state foot dragging, but, we all won and you won. And now we're a step closer to making it easier and, more affordable for everybody in this country to be healthy. So that's just earth shattering. And it's a big win for patient sovereignty, for, medical freedom, for compounders, for all of us. So great work, Brigham. Great work, all the people watching this show. Next up, we have Lee Rosebush. He's a defense attorney, patent lawyer. He's got experience as a pharmacist. He has in-depth knowledge of and experience working with biologics. And he's at the forefront of this whole movement of how to stay healthy, how to present at FDA hearings on peptides. I mean, he's really just done incredible work with all kinds of groups, and we're very grateful for that. Welcome, Lee Rosebush.
Tony, thank you. And I want to send a personal thank you for everything that you've done, everything that MAHA has done, and especially this administration in this last week and a half. As Brigham just mentioned, it's been a heck of a week. As somebody who, as a PharmD, I'm a doctor of pharmacy. I've served as a registered pharmacist now for just over 20 years. Still hold my pharmacy license today, in addition to being a lawyer and an MBA and a master's of finance, which I went to school way too long. But as somebody who has spent the last 5 years having this fight for peptides, it really means a lot to see what MAHA has done and what this administration has done to stand up for patients' rights. One of the big things, as Brigham just mentioned, is we as OFA and as the American Academy of Peptide Medicine do, is to try to fight to ensure patients and providers have access to the medications they need. And that is exactly what this administration did, was they put forward a policy to ensure that the patients and providers now have access to these medications. And we have taken it serious to ensure on the safety discussions that patients and providers have the safe access to these medications. One of the things that we have worked with the administration to do is to help set up the American Academy of Peptide Medicine. It is a nonpartisan based organization that is helping establish standards to ensure that when you receive BPC or CJC or name your peptide, that it has gone through the safety testings to ensure it is what they say it is. In addition, from that perspective, we've tried to help establish safety standards moving forward. So if you were to receive 20 units, for example, of BPC each night from Brigham's pharmacy or any other pharmacy, you would ensure that it is the same 20 units of BPC moving forward. And finally, one of the big things that AAPM is doing is to ensure that we hear a lot about APIs that are coming in from China and other locations. And to ensure that we have safe access moving forward is to ensure that we've established safety standards. So that way, Brigham's pharmacy or any other pharmacy or any other lab will have a set standard to be able to test those against. So that way, as we move forward with peptides and prescriptions are filled, we can ensure that patients have what they say they have and the proper strengths. So in other words, the proper standards that we would run through an HPLC or UPLC machine, the impurity testing, the potency testing, and the sterility testing to ensure that patients have safe access to these medications moving forward. And as Brigham mentioned, as somebody who previously presented at the October 24th and the December 24th PCAC hearings, I am delighted to be able to go back and present much more clinical references and materials that we have pulled since that date. One of the things that we have often heard is, well, why? If BPC was so great, why isn't it FDA approved and why isn't there pharma out there approving it? And Tony, you laid out a perfect example of what sort of a peptide is. It's in the nature. It's what we naturally have access to in our bodies as an example. And one of the things that a lot of folks don't realize is that because something is natural and it is a well-known substance, it can't be patented. And from a pharma perspective, if something can't be patented, they don't have a reason therefore to pay for the studies that go forward with these materials. And so without Secretary Kennedy's access and the administration's access to what they provided this week with PCAC hearings, many patients would never have safe access to these medications, because the likelihood that pharma will move forward with these is very, very slim, because they wouldn't be patentable, because they are well known and naturally known. And if they're not patentable, the likelihood of FDA approval or moving forward with a phase 3 clinical trial is very small. Now, I do want to hit a misnomer that a lot of people don't realize. You hear an awful lot that there isn't a lot of information about these, or these aren't well-known substances. But a good example of where you can find some of this clinical information is that when a clinical trial is done, for example, here in the United States, they have to list that information on clinicaltrials.gov. And so if folks go to clinicaltrials.gov and put in BPC-157, they will see that there's been more than 800 clinical trial references for many of these peptides that are put together. And for BPC specifically, it has been studied since 2015. So just listing on NIH and clinicaltrials.gov materials, you can see that there were phase 1 clinical trials going back more than a decade ago instead of studying these materials. Now, we as AAPM, and you'll see more of this as we present at the next PCAC hearing, have pulled, as I just mentioned, over 800 clinical references associated with, thanks to the help of many of the folks who were on this phone call today. And I look forward to being able to provide this information so that way we can have access to many more peptides. Now, one of the things that we hear about is, what about how many peptides we'll have access to and how big is this going to be? You know, the first announcement coming up in July, there's 7. In that perspective, the February 27, we have an additional potentially 5 to 7 substances as well. Now, as Secretary Kennedy has said on numerous podcasts, and I thank him personally for this from this perspective, is that we also, me as one of the attorneys, filed a lawsuit against the Biden administration for their illegal activities of placing some of these others on list 2. And so we also look forward to addressing some of those substances that are still involved with those litigations, and being able to move forward from that perspective on things like CJC and Promorlin as well. And we believe that we've also have additional information associated with this that shows the safe nature of these. And we look forward to working with the administration to be able to provide those references as well. And so thank you. Again, I want to personally thank Brigham, Gary, Jillian, and all the folks that have been associated with this. It would not have been done without you. And MAHA, especially for the last year and a half for the fight that we have worked up together, it means an awful lot to be able to say we've done it. We provided patients and providers access to this. And as we move forward, right, we look forward to being able to help set standards to ensure patients have the safe access to these medications. So thank you for everything.
Thanks, Lee. You know, I was just thinking that when you talk, you're so incredibly calm, but you've been just a tenacious, fierce, relentless warrior for all of this. And I just want to make sure that everybody knows that that's who you really are. You know, that you come across as this really gentle guy, but you have made so much happen. And we're all so grateful for it. And you point out, you know, they've been saying, so many people have been saying these things are untested. And there are 800 clinical trials. I mean, that's just such a great point. 800, let that sink in. And, you know, you've just done a great job. We're grateful, so happy to see this get across the finish line.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Kyle Diamantis. He is runs the Human Foods Program at the FDA. Does just a spectacular job there. And he's the FDA's top food person. And he sets the strategic direction and operations for food policy. He's also a senior counselor at the FDA. Thanks so much, Kyle, for coming on once again.
Hey, Tony. Great to be on with you. Thanks for having me. Look, I thought I'd take a few minutes to talk about some of our upcoming work in the food space. I had the opportunity to talk yesterday at the Politico Healthcare Summit here in DC and highlight some of the tremendous work being done under the leadership of President Trump and Secretary Kennedy in the food and nutrition space. As Secretary Kennedy has highlighted several times, we will be releasing later this month, next week, data from the largest and most comprehensive infant formula contamination testing effort in U.S. history. That included over 300 different products for heavy metals, so lead, cadmium, arsenic, mercury, over 318 different pesticides, 22 different phthalates and plasticizers, and 30 PFAS compounds. That generated over 120,000 different data points. Look, breastfeeding is the gold standard. We all know that. And we want to support and promote breastfeeding whenever possible. But that's not always an option. So for those moms and parents who choose or must rely on infant formula, we believe the data is reassuring that the infant formula supply is safe. A lot of work has gone into protecting the infant formula supply. And look, there's a lot more work to be done. As many folks on this call know from their work in this space, many of these contaminants are ubiquitous in the environment, right? They're absorbed through the water, through the soil, through the air. These are very hard or impossible to remove. But this administration, under the leadership of President Trump and Secretary Kennedy, is absolutely committed to using all tools in our toolbox to help ensure that that work continues. I also wanted to just highlight real quick, Tony, that we've been spending a lot of time in the first year of this administration, and really even longer than that, on standing up an independent post-market office within the foods program at FDA. So that never existed before. Before Secretary Kennedy's leadership in this administration, the FDA would only look at a chemical or additive in the food supply on an ad hoc basis in response to a citizen's petition, in response to adverse event reports, or congressional interest, for example. But there was no systematic process in place to actually look at chemicals and additives once they were approved or introduced into the food supply. And that resulted in processes where there's hundreds, thousands of chemicals in the food supply in the US that have not been studied or reassessed in decades upon decades. And so, while this might not sound sexy on its face, this really is the fundamental framework for the future of FDA's work in the space. And it will lay the groundwork for decades of action by FDA regarding review, assessment, and ultimately removal of chemical additives from the food supply where appropriate. So, this is a process that is intended to last. It's based on gold standard science. It would be very easy to come in sort of with a wrecking ball and just try to take action on a number of things. That's easily reversed or struck down by courts. You have to do this the right way. For the lawyers on the phone like Lee, there's requirements under the Administrative Procedures Act that must be followed. And so we have built out a process that I believe is unimpeachable. It includes a systematic process, again, for establishing how FDA will monitor, triage, prioritize, assess, and manage food chemicals. And that also includes a new prioritization tool. If you really think about the number of chemicals in the food supply, it's impossible for us to systematically review each and every one of those. And so we've established a new prioritization tool that's going to help us rank chemicals for priority review. And so we're really excited about that. It's going to focus on things like the health effects of a potential chemical, the cardiovascular, cancer, toxicity risks, things like dietary exposure and whether that's increased over time, whether that chemical is found in foods intended for susceptible subpopulations like infants, and then new available data. We know a number of these chemicals and additives haven't been reviewed in years or decades. And so whether there's new available data, we think is really important to that assessment. And ultimately, we'll rank these chemicals. And based on that ranking, we'll prioritize them for review. So really excited about this new framework. The work continues across the board at FDA and HHS on a number of fronts, whether that's ultra-processed foods, GRAS standards, post-market framework, infant formula. We really are pedal to the metal on food reform at FDA. And thanks to everybody on this call for the support, and always happy to be on. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Kyle. And, it really is crazy when you think about the fact that there have been thousands of products and chemicals added to our food without gold standard science. And that, this has happened over an entire generation and nobody stopped it. And, these things have made us sick. They've made us the sickest country of the 30 industrialized countries. And the amazing thing is that because of the work that you're doing and your team and the whole team at HHS, this is stopping now. So that's just an incredible turnaround. And like you said, the hope is that we set it up in a way that it can't be undone. So thanks so much for the work you're doing.
Thanks, Tony.
Next up, we have Dr. Daniel Pompa, and he's the author of The Cellular Healing Diet. And, through his own journey to health, he became a leading cellular health expert and is now teaching practitioners all around the world with advanced detoxification strategies. just doing incredible work. We're grateful to have you on once again.
Hey, thank you, Tony. I have to applaud what Kyle just said and talked about. I just interviewed a gentleman, he's an attorney, Paul Levin, and on a subject that not a lot of people know about, but I'm dedicated to bringing out this to the public's eye, and I hope this gets everywhere from here to Fox News and beyond. But it's about infant formula, given to preemies. And what's happening is literally about 3,000 to 4,000 cases a year of this type of neurological colitis that's happening. But here's the tragic part, is that literally 1 out of 3 die. And it's so easily prevented. So it's the fact that their guts aren't mature enough to handle some of the things in the formula. And some of these hospitals now, because there's been 4 cases that this gentleman and his firm actually sued. So now hospitals are saying, hold on, we don't want to be sued. So they're waking up to the fact and putting things in place to literally give parents more options on human breast milk, which has never been done until now. It should have been done. But anyways, a subject that I would love to talk more about. And Kyle, thank you for what you're doing on your end. But, we literally have to wake up to this fact that this can easily be prevented. Number one, these formulas can be made safe. So there's 2 lawsuits, one against the food companies themselves, and then one against the hospitals for not giving informed consent that this is, actually happening. So I think it's a subject here at MAHA we can bring and make more well-known. Okay, I was asked to talk a little bit about peptides. Something that, I love and know a lot about, only really for my own usage. And I'm not going to give any medical advice here, I assure you. But that said, I was asked to just kind of talk simply about some of my favorite peptides and some of the ones that I've seen really great results with people with, and speak in a very basic way. Obviously, most people listening know that TB-500 and BP-157 are used for aches, pains, and at least in most of our refrigerators and freezers, you find those 2 peptides. And I'll add one more to that, and that's the GHK-Cu, which, ladies, most of you, I think, are experimenting with because of its effect on collagen. However, we have to realize that copper peptide, which really, it acts literally more like a chaperone to copper. So, don't think that it can actually lead to copper toxicity. It doesn't. But that's its impact on the face and also the joints. And it's argued that as we age, we need a peptide like that. We need access to copper even more. And today that is becoming more difficult. So therefore, many people start taking that particular peptide, GHK-Cu, the Cu for the copper, and get great results. And I can tell you, from the joint perspective, it really does work. And ladies, you would say that it absolutely does work. 157 and some of the other peptides that we've been discussing. Let me talk about a couple others that I think people need to hear about. One called IL-30-37, which works at the immune system in the gut. So we think of interleukins as driving an inflammatory process. This one puts the brakes on. And I can tell you, for people with gut trouble, the IL-37 works amazing, and yet so few people actually know about that particular peptide. So that might be one that people, put on their radar. I would add to that in this gut protocol, if you will, if we're, again, not giving medical advice, but I would add the thymosin alpha-1, which also has a modulating effect on immune system. It kind of brings down hyperimmunity and upregulates good immunity, if you will. But it does seem to work in the gut, especially if you take it with the if you take it with the BPC-157. And for the gut, I like to take the oral form of BPC-157 in a liposome, which, again, it's getting easier to get. And, obviously, many of the practitioners are carrying good ones not from China. And we're going to be able to have safe access to that. So, those peptides, I think really are some of the ones that stand out that seem to work for most people. And I will add, some of the brain peptides are worth, especially so many people with anxiety. There's one called C-Link, S-E-L-I-N-K, and then even C-Max, S-E-M-M-A-X, that both work very differently in the brain, but can help brain fog memory, the C-Max that is, and the C-Link more for anxiety. So I hope that just kind of gives a broad base. That's what I was asked to do, of some peptides that are very safe and work amazing for people. And again, I think they're studied. And with some of the new legislation, we're going to have better access, safer peptides, not from China, and that is applauded.
Thanks for coming on and for clarifying all of that. I mean, whether it's GHK-Cu or IL-37 working on the gut, as Brigham said and as you said, we need more tools in our toolkit, on our tool belt, and these changes are really helping with that. So thanks again for coming on and for all the great stuff you've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely, Ty. Thanks for having me. Always.
Next up, we have the incredible Vani Hari. She's known as the Food Babe, and has looked at corporate accountability for more than 10 years, looking at all the toxins in our food and how to get them out. She's also the best-selling author of numerous books and the founder of Truvani. And more importantly, she's a MAHA warrior, fighting to make it easier for everybody in this country to be healthy. So thanks so much for coming on again, Vani.
Thank you so much for having me, Tony. It's an honor to be here always. On Monday, we have a coalition of health advocates, elected officials, nonprofits, all mobilizing at the Supreme Court that day. It's going to be April 27th at 9 a.m. We want you there. If you're in DC, if you're close by, we want you there with us, because the justices are going to be hearing one of the most consequential pesticide cases in U.S. history. That morning, they'll be hearing Monsanto versus Durnell, a case in which Bayer, a German corporation that acquired Monsanto back in 2018, is asking the court to rule that an EPA-approved label should be enough to shield them from cancer lawsuits. And so this would have if this case were to go forward in favor of Bayer, a win could shield Bayer from accountability of over 60,000 other cancer lawsuits already pending, and also set a precedent for affecting tens of thousands of pesticide products currently on the market. There's over 57,000 chemicals that it could apply to. So this is very consequential. This is about humanity. This is about generations to come and our children's generation. And that's why we are all gathering there at the Supreme Court. Tony, you're going to be speaking. I'm very excited about that. We have Kelly, who's on this call later. She's going to be speaking. We have people from both sides of the aisle, Representative Shelley Pengree and Representative Thomas Massey. We have farmers like Joel Salatin and Mark Dula. We have people who are, generational farmers like Zach Lane, who's running to be governor in Iowa. We have nonprofits coming to the table like Friends of the Earth and Center for Food Safety and Beyond Pesticides and Children's Health Defense and others. It is going to be an enormous gathering of people that are going to say, enough's enough. We do not stand for corporate liability for one of the most evil corporations of the world, definitely one that has given so many farmers cancer and people cancer with their product. Just yesterday, in an exchange on the Hill, Secretary Kennedy confirmed glyphosate causes cancer. It was stunning. And the Democrat that was pushing him said, hey, you're being kind of diplomatic about your answer about glyphosate. And he's like, I just called glyphosate cancerous. What do you mean I'm being diplomatic, right? And this is kind of what we're up against. Bayer has increased their lobbying efforts by 16% just in the last quarter of this year. This court case to them is the most important thing. And this is why they convinced someone at the DOJ to submit an amicus brief on behalf of the Trump administration. This is why they were pushing for glyphosate to be a national defense priority and why they've been threatening the administration that they're going to pull glyphosate from the market. They've been doing that kind of rigorous activity for year after year. Glyphosate has only increased no matter who's in office. And if we don't all come together, we are not going to have a chance to defeat this. And this is the moment that we put all politics aside and we all come together in this big way to make our voices heard. It's going to be a spectacle you've never seen before in Washington. I think it's going to be the biggest food movement we've ever seen happen, food movement rally. And I'm really excited for all the people that are coming into town for this event and going to make their voice heard, because this is our moment to really shut down the whole idea that corporations could be not held liable for causing cancer, that the Farm Bill has this type of language. We're going to be shutting that down. The fact that 21 different states are looking at different bills to do this in their states. We're going to say enough's enough, and we are going to fight back. And I think the people can be even more powerful than the money that's being spent in Washington. But every single day we are up against enormous amount of special interests from this company that are using their spokespeople through the farm bureaus, through CropLife, that seem very farmer focused, but they're pushing their chemicals forward. And so we got to fight back. And this is our moment. See you at the Supreme Court, April 27th at 9 a.m.
Bonnie, great to have you on. You know, you're a true warrior. You never back down. It's clear that MAHA can change the world, that we can stand up to some of the most powerful companies on the planet. And, we can have dialogue. We can include everybody. And we believe that by doing that, we can help deliver better health outcomes. And that this is an opportunity that, hasn't been there for a generation, that these things have just gotten worse and worse and worse. And now we can finally start to turn them back. So thanks so much for everything you're doing, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Senator Rand Paul from the great state of Kentucky. He's an incredible fighter for free speech, medical freedom, and real science that serves the entire public, not corrupt corporate science. He's been a strong backer of the MAHA movement, from the start. He's the author of an incredible book, Deception, the Great COVID Cover-Up. Senator Paul, thank you so much for coming on once again.
Thanks, Tony. I think most of you saw that over the weekend, President Trump released a key executive order that would remove barriers for patients seeking access to psychedelic drugs. The executive order would direct the FDA commissioner to provide priority vouchers for companies that make drugs like psilocybin and MDMA. Director McCary stated this national priority review pilot program that he has started is to speed up approval of drugs with innovative cures. His goal is to approve drugs in an estimated 2 months instead of over 6 months in other FDA priority review programs, and the years it takes for normal drugs. We're trying to speed that up. The executive order also directs the DEA and the FDA to create a regulatory framework for these drugs to quickly make their way to eligible patients. I've introduced something similar, the Breakthrough Therapies Act, in the last Congress. This would reschedule MDMA and psilocybin from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2. This would prevent federal bureaucrats from restricting access to these potentially game-changing treatments. Schedule 1 drugs are defined as drugs with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. This statement, if it was ever true, cannot really be said in good faith regarding the psychedelics. There have been numerous studies that have shown promise in psychedelics in treating PTSD, depression, anxiety, and even compulsive habits like smoking in a controlled environment, supervised by a physician. The current standards of practice is not good enough. About a third of the people with PTSD and depression are resistant to the current standard of practice, whether that be cognitive behavior therapy, anti-anxiety medicine, antidepressants. To be fully effective, the executive order needs to be codified, though, into law, or else the agencies will find an excuse for not being able to create a framework for physicians to administer psychedelics. My Freedom to Heal Act which I introduced this Congress, would mandate that the DEA create a process for physicians to administer FDA breakthrough therapies that are still Schedule I drugs without losing their medical license. This executive order is a huge step in the right direction, but Congress needs to pass the Freedom to Heal Act to guarantee that the unnecessary red tape will not stop treatment with psychedelics. It's time for the stigma against big pharma approved products to end.
Senator Paul, thank you so much for coming on. It seems like, you are doing just great things. And, what I really like is that you don't just take one side. You look at the science, you think these things through, and you're willing to back what the president does when you think it's the right thing and back it strongly. And when you think it's the wrong thing, you call it out. So, that's what I think everybody in government ought to do. And that's also what real science is, that there is no settled science, that we need to be able to question everything. And you've done a spectacular job doing that. So thanks so much for all the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Tony.
Next up, we have Kelly Ryerson, and she's known as the Glyphosate Girl. She works at the intersection of agriculture and health. She's collaborating with farmers, scientists, policymakers, and the media to address agrochemical damage to our soil and to our bodies. Thanks so much, Kelly, for coming on again.
Thank you so much for having me. I first wanted to point out how incredible and monumental it really is for Kyle's announcement regarding baby formula, because just as a point of comparison, a few years ago, I was at the previous administration's FDA with two organizations, GMO Science and Moms Across America, with some horrific data on what was in the heavy metals that were in baby formula. And we presented this with the pediatrician, and there was no response and no reaction. And meanwhile, the baby formula is the first thing a baby has for the first many months of their life. So it's such a critical window. So I just want to thank the FDA and that work on that. It's enormous and can't be understated. So back to what I usually am working on, in alignment also with this rally next week, we also are all working very hard on the Farm Bill. As probably you've heard in previous media hubs, the Farm Bill, it currently includes a pesticide liability shield, and it is rapidly moving. It's gone through committees. It's rapidly moving to the House floor for a vote. But first, it's going through something called the Rules Committee, which is an area that we can get an amendment slipped in to potentially strip out the pesticide liability shield. So we've been working really hard with a bunch of incredible Congress people from both sides. And just today, several Congress people filed amendments to strip the liability shield out of the Farm Bill, including a bipartisan amendment from Shelley Pingree and Thomas Massey, who have co-sponsors, also bipartisan co-sponsors. Anna Paulina Luna and Nancy Mace also filed separate amendments to strip the pesticide liability shield out of the Farm Bill. So we won't know until Monday afternoon whether or not the Rules Committee has accepted any of these amendments to go to the floor for a vote. So in the meantime, we're calling on people to call the members of the Rules Committee, especially the Republicans, and tell them how much this matters. It is a crisis moment. In the same way that Supreme Court case is a crisis moment, this is a crisis moment for our country. We do not want chemical companies to have a liability shield. Looking down the line to next week, when the Farm Bill hits the floor, we're going to also be calling for all hands on deck, to be calling all the Congress people who will be voting on this and ask them to reject a Farm Bill that has a liability shield in it. So then pivoting a bit, my organization, American Regeneration, I run it with my co-executive director, Ryland Engelhardt. We are hosting a 2-day gathering at Sovereignty Ranch in Bandera, Texas. And this is going to be an incredible event. It's called the New American Dream. We are going to focus on restoring health to soil, to food systems, to people, and the American spirit. We're partnering with the group Acres USA. For those who are in the ag world, know they've long committed to sustainable farming ideas. And we're going to have experts that are talking about regenerative agriculture, land stewardship, livestock integration, nutrient-dense food, all those things that are going to make the new dietary guidelines possible and truly restore health to Americans. There's going to be some people speaking there that you will know. Jimmy Emmons from NRCS, who was critical in the $700 million from the USDA for regenerative agriculture. Nate Sheets, who's the new Ag Commissioner of Texas and highly MAHA supportive. And farmers Rick Clark will also be there talking. And so if you are interested in coming down to this beautiful ranch in Texas, we still have tickets available. You can go to AmericanRegeneration.org and please join us. We're also going to be spending a lot of time talking about alternatives to pesticides. So the kinds of things that Secretary Kennedy has been talking about investing in so that we can get off of the chemical treadmill. We are going to be featuring a bunch of people that have those solutions, including robots and alternative technologies and simply regenerative practices, to really outline what the potentials are. So, and finally, I hope everyone is coming to this rally on Monday. Just want to double down what Bonnie was saying. It's going to be epic. It's going to be something that no one wants to miss.
Hey, Kelly. So, I just want to say that we really need people like you. You've stood up. You don't back down. You've called out corruption, and then you go meet with the president to try to get work done. So it's just perfect. And after an administration that censored everything, that deplatformed people by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, we now have a system in place and a group of people in place where somebody who questions the status quo doesn't get shut down. They meet with the president. So thanks so much for the work you're doing. Monday.
Sure. And I just as a comment on that, on that meeting at the White House, I guess 2 weeks ago, it was a wonderful opportunity, and we're really grateful for it.
Thanks, Kelly. Great to see you, and I'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Gary Brecka, and Gary is the visionary founder, as I always say, of The Ultimate Human. He's a human biologist, a biohacker, and a longevity expert. He travels around the world teaching people how to live healthier lives. He brings great products to all of us. I'm actually wearing one of them now. And he's one of the loudest MAHA champions out there. So thanks so much, Gary, for all the work you do, and welcome once again. Hey, Gary, we can't hear you.
Forgot to turn off my mute. So it's good. It's really good here. And, a lot of my previous speakers stole some of my thunder. They hit the nail right on the head regarding peptides. I find myself in a lot of peptide debates and discussions recently. And I think a lot of people think of peptides as being these new, sort of very novel, recently discovered synthetic polymers that are out there that we're making wild health claims about. But I think it's important to just back up for a second and talk about what peptides really are. They fall into the category of something called biological polymers. And they're in the same category as carbohydrates, proteins, fats. Peptides are actually capable of being broken down enzymatically by the body. I have a saying that I say all the time: more of what God gave us and less of what man makes us. Very often, even practicing physicians, classically trained physicians, don't realize that the vast majority of these peptides are made endogenously in the body. GHKC, the copper peptide, is an endogenous peptide. GLP-1s are endogenous peptides. We make them in response to nutrient density. Insulin is a peptide. Ghrelin, where we synthesize BPC-157 from gastric juice. And what's important to know is when these compounds enter the body and provide signaling to the body, they're then enzymatically broken down, and we eliminate the waste. Most of everything else that we talk about on this call, and what Vonnie has been fighting so hard against, and forever chemicals and glyphosate, they fall into the category of pharmaceuticals, synthetics, and chemicals. These are things the body doesn't recognize. It doesn't have enzymes for it, doesn't have a mechanism to eliminate the waste. They don't go through the same transsulfuration and glutathione pathways that a peptide would go through. The reason why we can't measure peptides in the bloodstream, usually very shortly after administering them, is because they truly are gone. They have provided a signal. They've been enzymatically broken down. Whatever waste is left over has gone through a natural biophysiologic pathway, and it's gone. So the the stacking of reactions and tachyphylaxis, which is a desensitization response. You don't see these kinds of things as frequently in peptides. I also just wanted to say that I'm not a physician. I'm not licensed to practice medicine, but I owned a very large functional medicine clinic for the better part of 10 years. I exited in 2005. And I just checked our data, and we had written in 10 years, our clinical team had written nearly 104,000 peptide prescriptions. And of the 104,000 peptide prescriptions that we wrote through our functional clinic, we did not have a single adverse event reported that required medical attention. There was itching at the injection site. There was some, swelling from time to time. There were people that reacted to things like DMSO, dimethyl sulfoxide, which are used to suspend some of these for shelf life. But in these lyophilized powders, the oral peptides, patches, creams, we had no adverse events that required medical attention. And I realize that is big data, and it's not a peer-reviewed, randomized, published, placebo-controlled clinical trial, but we've never done a peer-reviewed, published, randomized clinical trial on parachutes. And I don't think anybody on this call would jump out of an airplane without one, because we have data. So to say that there's no data on peptides is really just ignoring the obvious. There are enormous meta-analysis studies. There are enormous big data studies prove the safety and efficacy of these compounds that are largely made in the body, but most importantly, are recognized and enzymatically broken down by the body. So I think very often we fear the unknown because we don't understand it. But if we just took a little bit of time to understand how these act and how they're constructed in the body, I think you'd have much more widespread adoption of peptides and peptide therapies. So I'll yield back the rest of my time. Thank you so much for having me.
To say that I learned something from you every single day, and I follow you on all kinds of different places, and it's just been great, and I'm just very grateful. So thanks again. And Dr. Oz is coming on next. He's in a rush, so let's go right to him. Dr. Oz, welcome, and I think you have 5 minutes left. So why don't we just start right in?
Thank you, Tony. I'm traveling, which is one of the reasons that I'm a little limited on timing. But I wanted to highlight for everybody, in case they missed it, the big news from yesterday. Chris Klump and Steph Carlton spoke at the American Hospital Association. I had spoken there the day before. This is a very large group of nonprofit hospitals. They help shape the narrative to how hospitals and the government and regulators work together. And the secretary and I went down to Miami about 2 weeks ago, and we took the new dietary guidelines to the first hospital in the country, which is the Jack Nicklaus Children's Hospital, that agreed, committed, signed a pledge that they were going to start using the dietary guidelines for the first time to guide the way they were going to use food as a nutrient, as a healing element in the hospital. Now, just to remind everybody, saying something that tastes like hospital food is a pejorative for a reason. We throw away about a quarter of all the food that's served to patients. And the reason that's important is because if we didn't waste that money buying food that no one was going to eat, and just instead invested that money in healthier foods that were made bespoke the way the patient wants them, then we'd actually get better nutrients in the patients recovering from big illnesses, and everyone would be better off. It wouldn't even cost you more. In fact, we know from the general experience at Tampa General Hospital, which is a place where Jeff Zakarian, a great chef, well known from his TV appearances. He's been on this show. Tony's had him on in the past. But he's been able to demonstrate in a pilot they launched last October that the total cost of food went up 5%. To put it in perspective, the budget of the hospital is $4 billion. Their food expense is $12 million. So food is a tiny amount of the budget of a hospital, but if you can actually not change it materially and get much, much, much better food, it's a huge win for the institution. Patients like it much better. They get the tools they need to recover. Food has always been a nutrient since Hippocrates and others began mentioning it thousands of years ago. So we've got an opportunity now to scale this. Jack Nicklaus went on, the hospital joined, they signed the pledge. And yesterday, Steph and Chris launched this for all the hospitals in the country, and a bunch of hospitals signed on. So now we have the American Hospital Association embracing the concept that their member institutions should look at the dietary guidelines, think differerly about how they're serving food and not get so locked into what all the doctors on this call, nurses know. We classically say it's, to 1800 ADA diet with 2 grams of sodium. It makes the food taste miserable. It's purely based on a few numbers that don't describe the nutrient value of food. And because they're not overtly toxic, doctors and hospitals have accepted them as reasonable. So they contract with these huge companies that make nutrient devoid meals that and they're not really palatable and therefore don't help our cause. So this is another huge step forward for the MAHA movement. And I wanted to connect everyone very clearly the dietary guidelines, which you should all be seeing and using, with the way we supply our hospitals with guidance on what foods to eat. Now, one other thing to add to this, I mentioned this briefly last week, but there's more data now coming out showing that high quality red meat consumed by Americans who have one of the Alzheimer's genes, which is 27% of us. So a quarter of the American people have a gene that makes them more prone to Alzheimer's. I mean, meaningfully more prone, especially if they're women. If those people eat high quality red meat, their Alzheimer's symptoms seem to go down. I'll say that again. You eat the red meat that for years we have dishonestly told the American people was not good for them. You actually reduce the incidence of Alzheimer's if you have one of these genes. Now, that doesn't mean red meat's good for everything, right? It's probably not great for diabetes. And I'm not talking about processed meat. That does not kielbasa we're talking about. It's high quality meat that has nutrients in it, like zinc and iron and other ones that are important to general health. And I believe this will be helpful for the American people to begin to realize that it's not a one-size-fits-all for dietary guidance, but the dietary guidelines took into account the possibility that we would have examples of this nature. So I'm glad I had a chance to opine on these issues, and I didn't cut out while I was driving here and trying to do my day job. And I wish you all the best. Thank you, Tony. Congrats.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's just so beautiful to see that the world is really changing, and that you think about the dietary guidelines, like we don't go to doctors and nurses and hospitals so that they can give us junk food. We go to them so that we can heal. And, even something like red meat. I mean, the WHO now says, still says right now that red meat is a likely carcinogen. That it's been so hard for so long to get good, real information. So just so grateful for the work that you, Steph, Chris Klump, and Bobby Kennedy have been doing. And it's just beautiful to see that things can get better. So thanks again for coming on.
Take care.
Next up, we have William Supple Jr. He's a PhD in behavioral neuroscience. He trained at Dartmouth, studying brainstem mechanisms for learning and for memory. His work was critical to uncovering the role of midline cerebral or cerebellum in emotional behavior and simple learned responses in mammals. He became involved in cancer research when his 83-year-old mother-in-law was diagnosed with terminal metastatic breast cancer, and just wouldn't take any standard of care treatment. She celebrates her 88th birthday next week, due to the help that he gave her. So thanks so much for coming on. Love to hear about the work you're doing and the book that you wrote.
Thanks a lot, Tony. Pleasure to be here. I want to be careful not to overstate this, but there is a cure for many types of cancer in the form of antiparasitics. This all started when my mother-in-law went into the hospital with a bowel obstruction and didn't want to go through the horrors of traditional chemotherapy. So at 83, she just wanted to go home and die, basically, to hospice. So she was actually so bad that she received last rites in the hospital because they thought she wouldn't make the 2-mile trip home. So she went home, and I had read about fenbendazole online, and I looked at the science, and it looked like, this is something that seems to be relatively safe. It's available. You can buy it on Amazon or in Tractor Supply. And so her husband mixed it into her yogurt, and she started, after about a month, she started to look better, feel better. She fired hospice. After about 2 months, she went back to the oncologist and found that her blood tumor markers had been cut in half. The only thing she was doing was fenbendazole. And within 4 to 5 months, she was completely healed. No tumors, no sign of disease. And her breast cancer has been gone ever since. So she's alive today because of an animal antiparasitic. So what fenbendazole is a, you give it to your dog. It's approved for animals, obviously. There's human variants as well, but it's it attacks parasites by exploiting a structural defect in their microtubule system. Miraculously, cancer cells have the same structural defect that is exploited by fenbendazole. And it only attacks the cancer cell or the parasite, which is why it has virtually no side effects. So my mother-in-law had no side effects. So word of her story spread. So in terms of trying to manage telling the same story over and over, I started a Substack, and I posted her story on there. The Substack is called fenbendazole.substack.com. And what started to happen after that were other people started to post, hey, it worked for me as well. So I had this library of case reports. And most people were more or less given up for dead. They'd gone through traditional standard of care therapy and were told basically, there's nothing we can do for you. And that's when they started to do fenben. And it's all different types of cancers, all solid tumor cancers. So what was interesting is, so this is at the individual level. One thing that was that I found in the course of doing the research for the book was that cancer incidence rates vary greatly around the world. So there are some countries where the cancer incidence rate is 1/3 or 1/4 of what it is in the US. If you look at all of the countries of the world and group them by whether they administer antiparasitic drugs or not, and that seems to be the key difference, is places like India, Mexico, Argentina, they have a public health program where they deworm the population once or twice a year using drugs very similar to fenbendazole, mostly albendazole and mebendazole. Those countries, and there's 123 of them, when you group them all together, they have half the incidence of cancer of the rich Western countries, more developed countries that don't use antiparasitics. So it looks like, from the epidemiological data, that antiparasitics like fenben, like albendazole, are actually preventing cancer as well. So it could be one of two mechanisms. The first mechanism is obviously the direct anti-cancer effects of the antiparasitics attacking microtubules, and they work so well because they have 10 other ways to kill the cancer cell, not just one like standard of care drug. But it could also be that undiagnosed, untreated, subthreshold chronic parasitic infections, which the CDC has determined is rampant in the US. Peter Hotez of COVID fame did a study for the CDC that found that up to 60 million people in the US alone are infected with Toxoplasma gondii from cats. So that undiagnosed subthreshold parasitic infection causes chronic inflammation. And we know that chronic inflammation is a risk factor for cancer. So it could be one of two mechanisms. So with this isn't French science. You know, a lot of the basic preclinical data comes from Hopkins, and ironically, the rest of the world is kind of getting out in front of it of us on this. So it's fenbendazole is a cheap, safe, 50-year-old drug that may be an important cancer tool that we're not using. And this is something, the use of repurposed drugs to treat something like cancer is something that the MAHA movement should really take a look at. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. It's clear that there's no end to the science. There's no limit to what we can learn. The science is never, ever settled. And that's what MAHA really stands for, that we question everything, that we're always looking for new answers, and that we recognize that the medical books from 20 years ago just always get it wrong. And they will always get it wrong in the future because we can always do better. So I'm thrilled to see this book and to learn about the research you're doing, and just to know that there are people like you that are out there questioning the status quo and the view that the science is all settled. So thanks for coming on.
I'm not an oncologist or an epidemiologist or an MD, so it's definitely off the beaten path science.
Right, but some of the time it takes people who are not part of the status quo to question the status quo.
Exactly. Thank you.
Next up, we have one of my favorite people, Dr. Eric Berg. He's known as the Knowledge Doc, and he's earned that title for being a globally recognized health teacher with over 45 million followers on all different platforms all around the world. And for more than 30 years, he's helped people start to comprehend their own body and how it works and how they can have practical strategies to improve their health. And so he's just an incredible thinker, writer, researcher, and he's been so helpful to the MAHA movement. He's really engaged with us every day for months and months now. So we're really grateful and glad to have you back.
Thanks so much, Tony. I really appreciate it. I wanted to just quickly back up the last speaker on the anti-parasitics, because these parasites have evolved with cancer and they use the same mechanisms of survival. So it's fascinating how simple it really is when you look at it. But it's so cheap of a remedy. It's what, $5 a dose. So of course, that's why they're not looking at that. But I did a video on it and I was blown away at how fascinating these anti-parasitics or dewormers work on cancer. But I wanted to shift gears on something that happened 3 weeks ago that not a lot of people are talking about. And I want to just put this on everyone's radar. So in 2007, Congress passed a law. And it says if you run a drug study in America, you have to post the results, all of them, not just the ones that worked, but the ones that did not work and the ones where they hurt people as well. And so it goes on a public website, and once 1 year after the trial ends, and that's the law. So, and when I say results, I'm not talking about, we did a study. I mean, the actual numbers. Did the drugs work on the thing you said that they were measuring? How many people got sick? How many people died? All of that is required by law. Because if a company runs 10 studies and only 2 out of 8 work, and they only show the good ones and suppress the bad ones, then the doctor and the patient are misled, especially in the consent form, the informed consent, when patients sign off that they know the risks and benefits. So that's the law for about 19 years. And the fine for breaking this law is about $13,000 a day per trial omitted. So every day they're late, the meter runs. 13 grand per day. So take a wild guess how many fines the FDA has collected in those 19 years. If you guess 0, you are correct. 0, not $1. So Oxford University did the math, and if the FDA had enforced the law, Pharma would owe $19 billion. So, and this is where it gets interesting, because 3 weeks ago, the end of March, the new FDA commissioner, Dr. Marty Makary, put out this announcement, and he said Pharma has been suppressing unfavorable clinical trial results. And he used the word suppressing, which means hiding, not showing, omitting. So this is like the first time a commissioner in that job has come out in the open and said it. I mean, he sent messages to 2,200 companies, 2,200, okay? And the message wasn't a fine. It was just saying, hey, we see you. We know you're out of compliance. You have to fix it. That's it. And you might say that's a little thing, but just take a look at the enforcement that happened in the last 19 years. The only letters that were sent out were like 8 in 19 years. So the way that enforcement actually works is step 1, you send a message out. Step 2, you get a pre-notice. 3, you get a notice of noncompliance, and then the fines start kicking in. So, as being part of MAHA, we have to back up the commissioner. And this is super important to put on your radar because it's what makes up the informed consent. The thing that not just the patient, but the doctor sees is knowing that, what you're getting these patients into and what they're getting into and so they have all the data to make the appropriate decision whether they want to take it or not. So this is a very important thing that just happened. The door is open. Now we got to kick that thing wide open and go all the way. That way, when people have the informed consent, all of the data is there to make the right decision. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, and thank you. I mean, it is fascinating and scary that cheap drugs, generic drugs, they're never pushed. We all know why. And, you add to that 19 years of no enforcement against big pharma for lies, for corruption, not having to pay $19 billion. So, and 8 letters in 19 years. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Almost don't know, where to start in discussing that. But it's just great that you're calling out that kind of corruption and that there are more and more people like you who are brave enough to just come right out and say it. I mean, these are powerful companies and they've fought back really hard over a long period of time. They made a lot of people's lives really tough. And they've had a government that's been backing them and it's been shutting people down who question them. So it's great that you're doing this work, that you're coming on here and saying it, but that you're saying it, these kinds of things, to 45 million people. That's just earth shattering. And personally, I'm just grateful for that. So thanks and keep up the incredible work. And somebody else who's doing incredible work and who's been fighting corruption for 20 years, who has the secretary's back, who's been at all of the congressional hearings with him day after day where they've been grilling him, but getting nowhere with it, is Stephanie Spear. And I think Stephanie Spear is here with us, but I'm not 100% sure. Stephanie, are you there? Great. So let me just say that I'm thrilled to see that, Bernie Sanders, gets on board with Bobby Kennedy, with you sitting, right there, and it says, yeah, we got to get rid of junk food ads on television and all around. And he and 2 or 3 others say that we're on the right track and that Bobby's doing good work. You've been standing by him and helping him get so much important work done when nobody in the country would say something good about him, when no newspaper in the country would say anything good about him. But you've been saying good things about him and making it possible for him to get such incredible work done for so long, for so many years. And I'm so grateful and I love you and welcome. Wait, now I can't hear you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Good. Love you too, Tony, and thank you to you and everyone at MAHA Action. I can't express how much it means to all of us when you prop us up from the outside. It keeps us going and also helped us keep our energy during these hearings. The secretary just finished 7 hearings over the last 2 weeks. And, it feels like whiplash most of the time. You go from Republicans sharing their gratitude to the secretary for all the efforts he's made, to the Democrats who not all the time, but most of the time, just want to grandstand and try to make him look bad. But he just did an incredible job at all 7 hearings, and was able to share the historic year and the health reforms that HHS has achieved. Some of the most sweeping public health reforms in modern history. As we all know from MFN and Trump RX, HHS has dramatically reduced drug prices. We all know about the food pyramid. We flipped the food pyramid upside down with one simple message: eat real food. The FDA's removed petroleum-based dyes. We're working to close the loophole on the GRAS standard so we can reduce chemicals in our food. We committed $50 billion to the Rural Health Transformation Fund. Also, thanks to the pressure of Secretary Kennedy, more than 50 medical schools have voluntarily committed to adding 40 plus hours of nutrition education for their medical students, compared to about 4 hours. And then our biggest 2 new announcements that I believe everyone on the call is well aware of. One is FDA took a long overdue action to restore science, accountability, and the rule of law by moving 12 peptides off Category 2. They're bringing them to PCAC, which is our Pharmacy Compounding Advisory Committee, at the next 2 meetings beginning in July. And so this action immediately helps reverse the dangerous black market that developed due to the Biden era decision to move those actually 19 peptides to Category 2. And then last Saturday was a very historic day for us when President Trump signed an EO removing barriers to psychedelic drugs as potential treatment for serious mental illness like ibogaine. That was a tremendous announcement. As you probably all know, Secretary Kennedy is committed to addressing addiction and mental health issues, and President Trump's courage and leadership on Saturday signing that EO is a step in the right direction. Like I've said before, it's just thrilling to be here at HHS, being able to support the president and Secretary Kennedy and Dr. Oz and Marty McCary and Jay Bhattacharya at NIH on these, essential components of our desire to get prevention prevention is the key element of how we're going to run our healthcare system, to go from a sick care system to a true healthcare system and make America healthy again. So with all the efforts of everybody on this call and the work of MAHA Action, I'm confident we'll get there. So thanks so much for all you guys do.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And, 7 congressional hearings, and you were sitting by his side the entire time. And, what's really becoming clear is that they can't stop him. They can't censor him. They can't shut him up. They can write hit pieces every day, but Americans just don't care. What Americans want is for you and Bobby and the whole team at HHS to just keep right on fire, fighting to make us all healthier and to make, this entire country healthier. And that's possible. You guys are doing it. And we're just incredibly grateful.
Well, thanks so much, Tony. We're focused, like I said, on prevention, and we're focused on ending the chronic disease epidemic. Many of the Democratic senators and Congress people just wanted to keep focusing on infectious disease when it's chronic disease that's killing so many Americans.
Definitely. Thanks again, Stephanie.
Thanks, Tony.
So thank you all for joining yet another MAHA Media Hub and for tuning in week after week. Sorry, this one ran kind of long. It was 90 minutes. But as always, thanks to all of our speakers for their insights, their dedication, and their contributions to the MAHA movement. We at MAHA have powerful tools at our fingertips. We have the MAHA report on Substack with over 200,000 subscribers. We have the MAHA Institute roundtables. We have the historic MAHA Summit that's coming up in September. We have the legislative tracker. MAHA films, MAHA books, MAHA parties and big events, and a mailing list of nearly 2 million MAHA warriors. And then we have all of you, all the people watching this show, the thousands and thousands of influencers who represent hundreds and hundreds of millions of followers. So we're going to harness every bit of that power to build this movement, to build the MAHA movement into the powerful and lasting organization that we know it has to be. And that, everybody in this country overwhelmingly wants the administration, both this one and the next one and everyone, to fight to make Americans as healthy as they can be. And we want to be partners in that battle, and we're going to fight it for as long as it takes. So as we saw with HR 2899, when we activate the MAHA army, all the MAHA warriors using our tracker, we can make a difference. And your voices are heard. And together, we can move healthier. We can move closer to making this country healthier. So following this call, you're going to get an email with a recording of all of the different clips from this show and calls to action. So please look at these calls to action and follow them. And please share all of our content as widely as you possibly can. That's what's going to make this movement more and more healthy. And then, next week, April 27th, join the People vs. Poison rally. I'm going to be speaking at it. There's so many great speakers, so many people who are on this call today who are going to be speaking in front of the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. Go to the peopleversuspoison.org to sign up. And thanks so much once again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday and every Wednesday at 4:00.
For decades, Bayer and Monsanto have poisoned our food and our families with glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup. And now, facing over 170,000 cancer lawsuits worth $16 billion, Bayer wants the Supreme Court to bail them out. It's time for the people to take a stand. On April 27th, we will march together at the Supreme Court. America demands equal justice under the law, with no immunity for chemical companies. It's the People versus Poison, April 27th in Washington, D.C.
America's children are sick, and moms have been betrayed. The time for empty promises, long past. Now is a time for action. MAHA is the most powerful force of collective action in generations. The grassroots power of moms and activists has created an army of health warriors with more reach than all mainstream media combined. Together, we can end the chronic disease epidemic. MAHA's influence is reaching millions. It's reaching Congress. And that energy, these chain reactions, are working.
How about Operation Stork Speed?
Dozens of food companies removing toxic ingredients.
I plan to lead by example.
MAHA is now.
We're talking about how to change the culture.
The American people want America healthy again.
It is a renaissance moment in health in America.
For health, freedom, and the truth. Join us at MAHA Action.